the fund, let's concentrate a little bit on the fund because it's, whether it happens or not, example of the idea that government should be in the business of finding effective organizations and then giving them significant dollars to allow them to grow. What potential risks might come along with that? One of the readings alluded to the fact that a lot of nonprofits that get really big, it's because they're relying on a single source. It's this interesting challenge that I think folks like America Forward and others are saying is that, listen, right now government just flows sort of on a regular basis to organizations without necessarily hard look at accountability. So we bring in accountability, it means there's more competition for funds, hopefully, big funds, but what are the potential risks of organizations who get that fund and then maybe don't get it, or maybe it's not as continual as it could be. But anyway, so the notion of the government relation to scale organizations and potential risks with that.
Well, so the principles that we've been thinking about have a lot to do with the way that government could serve as a partner to not directly deliver services, but to invest in solutions. And those could be really at the very local level of citizens with great ideas about how to solve a problem, and it could be more at the sort of scale of the national branded, very established organizations. And we think that there's room for both. And how the fund plays out will really, there'll be some real decisions that have to get made about how broadly it is set up at the outset. But one of the major reasons for it is that right now, one, the philanthropic capital that is available will never truly scale anything. I mean, the kinds of problems that we're talking about are just so large compared to any philanthropic investment that we have to figure out how to connect to public resources. And two, in so many communities around the country, there just isn't the philanthropic capital to provide the startup money for an organization to grow. I mean, if you look at the City Years and the Teach for Americas and the Year Ups and Jumpstarts of the world, Jumpstart actually has a model that lets them go to smaller places, but most of those organizations can't afford to be in smaller markets. If there were government money that were organized along the lines of growth capital, and then in some instances some better allocation of ongoing revenue streams against certain critical problems in education and workforce development, you could imagine that these innovations could actually get delivered to many, many communities that wouldn't otherwise ever see them. And so that's really the idea. The risks are very real. I don't think we have a good answer for that. I think our hope is that if it works, if we could see resources allocated on more of a performance basis, then that would stick.
Yeah.
The William Foster article, which is what I'm guessing you're alluding to about how profits get really big, we're actually in an interesting dialogue with him now to try to figure out how much you can predict relationships between mission, program model, economic model, and revenue models, and that's an ongoing stream of work.
What do you mean?
Well, I think that he has another article coming out that takes the one that you all read to the next step, but if you think that there's certain kinds of revenue models that are very naturally coupled to certain kinds of program models, then a nonprofit given a certain mission and program is actually constrained in how they could possibly scale. It's not like any one organization has an equally good shot at saying we're going to be all about a government or all about individuals. And so if we can get savvier in the nonprofit sector about understanding the linkages between program models and economic models, then we can probably bypass a lot of the detours that organizations get into, particularly related to revenue. I think that the best answer to the risk that I have comes from our conversations with Earl Phelan, who until very recently ran Bell, about this. When he made a strategic choice during the time that Bell was in our portfolio to focus on SES dollars as the major revenue stream for Bell's operations.
Do you just quickly?
And SES, supplementary educational services.
These are Left Behind Act sub part of that.
Right. So No Child Left Behind allocates dollars that go to kids in schools that don't meet standards, and the dollars go with the kid, so parents can actually make a decision about where their kid will get the supplementary services. And Bell is an after-school program and a summer program focused on closing the achievement gap that became an eligible provider, which was actually a very big deal for a young social entrepreneurial organization. And they suddenly saw that they had a predictable revenue stream that could enable scale much more efficiently than philanthropy, although there were a lot of kinks in that story. And they went for it. And the decision was made that they couldn't hedge. They could not have another revenue strategy in play at the same time as effectively. But the answer to it became be an action tank. Because Earl then realized that he needed to do more than just run a great program. They needed to start thinking about how to ensure that SES, or the equivalent of it, is a sustainable source. Mm-hmm. And so he had to start thinking about policy, and he hadn't really thought about it in that way before. That's probably the best answer we have.
Yeah, that's
I think that there are some questions that are difficult for government to handle in dealing with social entrepreneurs. Yes, I consider myself one. I work in an organization of social entrepreneurs. I hire them. One is there are a few risks in creating this fund, though I'm 100% in support of the fund. One is a further alienation of one group of nonprofits over another group of nonprofits, and that often also overlaps with race and class. This is just got to be honest about that. When we were doing a AmeriCorps, when you were looking at some of the social entrepreneurial organizations, you didn't see Council of La Raza there. You didn't see the NAACP there. You didn't see the Urban League there. They had different stances on how we should do funding, how we should look at things. Even the traditional corps did not agree with some of the new urban corps. I mean, this was, it was a very interesting time of what that could mean. And so, what has 10 to 15 years brought, I think it's changed the nonprofit sector, but I would hate to see that we ignore the importance of capacity building and the organic strength that comes from a local community. I think that's really important. And so I think if we are to go with this fund, there's, the details are going to be, you have to get in bed with these folks. You do not want La Raza on the other side of the table. You just don't. No, I mean, this is, or you alienate LA. There's got to be a way we figure out these things. And so I think the other piece is this question of ethically, should government be funding something in the nonprofit sector? This is an old guard where people are really designing and developing a fee-for-service kind of program. It still is a question out there. A lot of people don't get it. It's great we have a level of sophistication. People here can get it. There are a lot of people out there like, you're a nonprofit, and what? I'm going to give you growth money, and what? You get money for doing this service from someone else, so why am I giving you money? You're really running a business. I mean, this notion that this is really understood when you really get to the Hill and policy level, it's not, I would never say you dumb things down, but you have to really be able to think through this notion of you're really separating engines who have revenue stream capacity with those who don't. And Europe as an organization has capacity for revenue streams, so I see that difference all the time too. And I guess the probably the last thing that could be a risk of it is this notion of that there doesn't currently there may not be room as much to innovate, but there are plenty of innovators in government. And I do want to say that I'm someone who goes into government every 4 years because I have to go back. Because that's where you make the largest scale impact. No matter what you say, that is where you do it. For me personally. And I have been fortunate to work with people who, at a moment in time, early and high in an administration, when you can make the impact, you do it, right? And so, and I would hate it to be, it's just the old guard and they don't do these things, but the truth is, in my case going in, and I have to be honest, as a woman of color, the old guard and the people on the ground, they all look like me. These were the people, these are the people who couldn't move up a manager level, that were really motivated to see you at a manager level. And for the first time, we were actually able to have kind of cross-agency councils of very field-level folks who had never, ever been visited by a senior person in government before. And they've been there for 20 years. And so I just want to make sure that we don't ignore the power of that population, and because they hold more than the keys.